Welcome. I'm Joanna Conti, and I want to thank you for joining us today for our discussion about how to easily comply with the Joint Commission's new outcome measures standard. So to set the stage before we get going, we're going to do, I wanted to cover a couple of things. First of all, just introduce myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Vista Research Group, and I started the company 2 years ago to help addiction treatment centers develop the data they need to improve their results and their bottom line. And I want to just tell you how I got interested in the addiction treatment space. I had a daughter who became a hardcore alcoholic, and she was in and out of treatment for about 5 years. And fortunately, she's doing fabulously today and has completely turned her life around and has been sober for the last 4 years. But when I look back on that time, what I kept remembering was being put in the awful situation of it was always a crisis, and I had to find a place to send my daughter to treatment immediately. And I had to make the decision on the basis of a phone call with somebody who sounded nice and said, "Trust me, we're better than the rest." And meanwhile, I was being asked to shell out, huge sums of money, $25,000, $30,000, $60,000. And when I looked back on this, I thought, why is there no data? Why is there nothing that tells me and other family members that if we invest $30,000 in the next 30 days to help our child, that our child has a fighting chance to be sober a year from now? So I started talking with leaders of different addiction treatment centers, and I kept saying, why aren't you doing this kind of outcomes research? And what I heard was, oh, we want to, it's in next year's strategic plan, we fully intend to, we don't have a clue how to do it. And I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started a number of businesses in the past, including a software company where I taught myself to program and sold software that I and other people created for 5 years. And I thought, this isn't rocket science. We can figure out how to provide outcomes data reasonably and inexpensively to this industry and help people improve their outcomes. And after I'd started the company, I also learned as I was digging into the academic research about all of the research showing that the process of monitoring your patients during treatment and reporting that back to the clinicians made a substantial difference in how quickly patients got better during treatment. So very shortly after we started the company, we expanded to do that. So anyway, that's my background and how I got here. So what we're going to cover today is, first of all, what the Joint Commission is requiring and why. Then we're going to talk about your keys to designing an effective system. Then we're going to talk about how insight addiction makes compliance easy. And finally, we're going to talk about how to thrive in the coming paid-for-value world. And we should have time for questions at the end. If you'd like to think of any questions and jot them down, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. So I want to start by talking about something I find kind of confusing, and that is all the different terms that are used for the same thing. The Joint Commission is referring to this as outcome measures. Progress monitoring is how it's often referred to in the research, or measurement-based care. Sometimes you'll see things reported as patient-reported outcome measures, or PROMs for short, or routine outcome monitoring, or feedback systems. All of these things mean the same thing. They mean getting information directly from your patients about how they're feeling and reporting that back to your clinicians in an easy to understand fashion so they can use it to inform clinical care. So let's dive in and talk about what the Joint Commission is requiring and why. So earlier this year, the Joint Commission issued a new standard, CTS 030109, that requires that all accredited behavioral health care organizations start using outcome measures by January 1st. And this standard has 3 specific requirements. First, you must use a standardized tool or instrument to monitor your patient's progress, and they're very clear they want this to be from the individual's perspective. How does the patient feel they're doing? Secondly, you need to use these results to inform the individual's clinical care. And third, you need to periodically aggregate the data to evaluate how effective your treatment is. Now, if you're an eating disorder treatment program, please go and look at the standard itself, because there is some additional requirements specifically for eating disorder. But for most of us, these are the 3 requirements that are most important. And so why did the Joint Commission do this? I believe it's because of the tremendous supporting research behind this. Dr. Carlier did a meta-analysis in 2013 where she looked at 45 different mental health-related clinical trials. And what she found was that the options where they used outcome measures, the patients that were enrolled in that trial did better than the patients whose clinicians were not receiving outcome measures in 2/3 of the cases. So that's a pretty substantial difference. And then when they looked at studies that focused on specific mental disorders like depression or anxiety, the numbers got even better. 76% of the 21 studies found that progress monitoring and outcome measures help patients get better faster. And among these trials, there were 3 that were conducted among addiction treatment programs. And all 3 of them showed that providing this type of data to the clinicians helped patients get better faster. Now, we've been talking to probably hundreds of different treatment centers over the last 6 months or so, and we've run into some common misunderstandings. One is we regularly get told, oh, we're already doing that. And when we dig in a little bit and we say, well, what exactly are you doing? What they're doing is their clinician is putting notes in their electronic health record about how they think the patients are doing. Now, that is really important. I don't want to minimize that, but that is not what the Joint Commission requirement is calling for. They want to see the reports from the patients themselves. The second misunderstanding we hear is people say, well, we have the patients complete surveys at admission and at discharge. So, we're covered, we're doing it. And the Joint Commission actually had a webinar in April, which is online. You can go to their website and watch it again. And they were specifically asked about this, and they said, absolutely not. If you just get data at admission and then you get data at discharge, you can't possibly be using the information while they're in treatment to see if they're continuing to improve. So that's not sufficient. And then the final common misunderstanding is, hey, as long as we have the patients doing the reports, that's good enough. Well, realize when you come up for reaccreditation, the Joint Commission is going to want to see proof that you're using this data to inform clinical care, and they're going to want to see the aggregated results of your research so that you can show how you compare, hopefully, to other addiction treatment centers, but also how you're improving over time. So I'm going to go into talking about what do you need to look at if you want to design an effective system. So I think that there's actually 4 groups that you want to think about to make sure that whatever you design really works for the entire treatment center. First, in terms of the patients, you need to make sure that the data that you're collecting is insightful, that it will help your clinicians understand how your patients are feeling. Secondly, you want to be developing data that your clinicians will really value and understand. If you're having patients fill out a survey and the clinicians don't understand it or, don't think it's very appropriate, you're not going to get much value for it. And then third, this can take a tremendous amount of staff time if you're going to do it manually. So think about, as you're designing your system, how you're going to minimize your staff effort. But there's a fourth group that's important to think about too, and that is to make sure that you do the analysis that your management can use to assess progress. So make sure you're analyzing the data effectively, comparing it to benchmarks, and doing trend analysis. In terms of what is insightful patient data, there's a couple of things we need to make sure of. First, make sure that the measures you use are academically validated and they're really measuring what you think you're measuring. Second, your surveys need to be designed for self-report. There's a number of surveys that we have to do in the addiction treatment world that are designed to be clinician reported from ASAM and others. But the surveys that you use need to be simple and easy for your patients to understand. Thirdly, they need to be sensitive to change. If you're asking a question, have you ever done X, Y, or Z, you're not going to get a different answer next week than you got last week. So that won't help you much. And then I think it's also important that your questionnaires be reasonably quick to take, or else you're going to get a lot of pushback from your patients. If you're asking them to take a 15-minute survey every week, you're going to get complaints. And then obviously you should be picking surveys that are specific to the co-occurring disorders that are common among your patients. So what we recommend and what we've been doing for the last year and a half is monitoring the patients at our clients for depression, anxiety, trauma, eating disorders, suicidal thoughts, self-harming behaviors, drug or alcohol usage during treatment, the strength and frequency of cravings, how well they're getting along with their family members, and how satisfied they are with treatment. Now let's talk about how do you make it easy for the clinicians to use the data. Well, I think probably the most important thing is to have the results available in real time. They may discover that they haven't seen recent results for one of their patients, maybe an hour before they meet with that patient, and they can, send a request to the patient to fill it in. They want to be able to look at those results before their patient comes in for counseling. Secondly, you need to make it very easy to understand. Graph it out so that, your clinicians can, at a glance, see the trends and see if, this data is showing that the patient is not doing well. A third thing we found really useful is to be able to let the clinicians see how the patients answered each detailed question if they need to. And then also provide a way that clinicians can easily identify those patients that aren't progressing as well as expected. I think you want to be alerting clinicians immediately if someone reports, maybe they've got they have strong feelings about suicide and some intention to act. The clinician should be notified of that immediately. And we've also found it's really useful to ask open-ended questions. Some of our clinical directors have told us they feel they get a different type of information from patients who fill in an online survey than they do face-to-face. Just some patients are just a lot more comfortable, talking to the anonymous world of the internet than they are to their counselors sometimes. And so they feel sometimes they get very, very thoughtful, useful information. Now, how do you make this so it works for the clinicians and doesn't take a tremendous amount of staff effort to manage? We recommend creating it so that your patient can take the survey on a tablet or a laptop or a smartphone, automate it so that the results come in and are graphed in real time, and allow the patients themselves to tell you what conditions they're struggling with. Now, this is a little different than maybe our common way of thinking about research. Sometimes how research is done is that the clinician needs to meet with the patient and then they decide, okay, I need to monitor this patient for depression and anxiety, but I don't think they have an issue with eating disorders or trauma, so we don't need to do monitoring of that. What we recommend is that you ask screening questions early on, very simple yes/no screening questions. And if they answer any of those screening questions positively, then you take them to the full academically validated scale. And so you've let the patients tell you what they're wrestling with. And finally, I think it's important to make it easy for the staff to request next surveys. So in terms of useful analyses from the data, you'll want to compare the data that you're getting to national norms and also to your previous results. Very useful information you can get from this is patient information, co-occurring disorder information, what percentage of your patients had moderate to severe levels of different co-occurring disorders at admission, and then how have they improved during the time that they were in treatment. And then finally, it's also very useful to look at what percentage of your patients are successfully completing treatment and how does this compare to national norms. One of the things that you're going to want to be able to do is to show the Joint Commission that you're complying with this requirement. And to do that, we recommend you do periodic audits that show what percentage of your patients are actually being monitored, are patients getting enrolled in this research, how frequently are you getting update reports from the patients, and finally, how often is each clinician assessing the patient reports? Because, you know, if the clinician never looks at it, obviously they're not using it to inform clinical care. So I want to talk about the program we've developed called Insight Addiction and how it makes compliance easy. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've been offering this program for the last 18 months to addiction treatment centers and have over time fully automated it so that it fully complies with all of the Joint Commission requirements. So just an overview, what Insight Addiction does is it identifies and tracks those issues directly related to treatment success. So we track depression, anxiety, trauma, and eating disorders. We also track suicidal thoughts and self-harming behaviors. We track the strength and frequency of cravings, and we track how satisfied patients are with treatment. Everything we do is done online. The patients take the surveys on a tablet, cell phone, or laptop. And how it works is they start off by granting permission via an online questionnaire for us to collect their information and immediately give it back to you. And this is how we comply with HIPAA. If you're serving adolescents, obviously we get patient or parent permission also. Once we have their permission, we take them to an intake questionnaire where we get information about the time before they started treatment on what was their primary drug of choice, how much were they using, what was their addiction severity. We ask about a number of quality of life measures, and then we do the screening and testing using the full symptom severity rating scales of any co-occurring disorders that they answer any of the screening questions positively for. So this survey ends up taking about 20 minutes. But at the end of it, we have a tremendous amount of information about your patients. And from that point on, we only ask about the issues that we know they're struggling with in their weekly updates. And so the updates only take our patients 2 to 4 minutes to fill out. Typically, they're very quick, so we don't get a lot of pushback from the patients. And then all of the data is instantly summarized in very easy to understand graphs. So this is what our graphs look like. You can see that they're color coded. And the black bar on the left shows what level of depression this patient had in the 30 days before they began treatment, what they reported feeling before they began treatment. And then you can see how they've been improving during the time they've been in treatment. So as I said, we collect this data online, and then we bring it in instantly into the software, which displays the patient results and generates PDFs you can download. This is what the patient listing in our software looks like. You'll see a list of all of your patients. You can click on the patient name, and that will take you to all of their information, their most recent results. And you can see that some of these patients have red flags next to their names. This means that in the most recent survey that this patient submitted, they reported some sort of dangerous behavior. Maybe they reported suicidal thoughts with intention to act. Maybe they're self-harming. Maybe they reported that they've been using drugs or alcohol during the time they were in treatment. And so we flag these patients so that you can easily see them. And then you can click through to the data for that patient with all the different areas that we're monitoring them for. And if you like, you can just generate a PDF by clicking a button. It will download to your computer, and you can use it for whatever purpose, or upload it to your electronic health record. And by the way, I should mention we're in the process of integrating with some of the electronic health records. We're farthest along with Kipu. So we are interested in integrating with the different EHRs that our clients use, and are doing that as quickly as possible. So you can see on this report, you can see, this is the first page, all the different measures that we're monitoring Jane for. And there might be up to 11 different graphs on this report, depending upon what we're monitoring the patient for. Now, if you've got 50 patients, you probably don't want to look through 50 reports each week. So what we do is we summarize the information in a different way. And this is summarized either by counselor or by program. Maybe you have a residential and an IOP program. We could summarize it either way. And what we show here is just the most recent data point for each of your patients that's being monitored for that condition as a function of how long they've been in treatment. So the theory here is somebody new to treatment who's suffering from depression is probably going to have pretty severe depression. But after they've been in treatment for a while, we would hope that their symptoms have been alleviated substantially. And so what we do is we label the patients in the yellow or red danger zone so that you can see at a glance which of your patients seem to really be struggling. So you might look at this report if you're a clinical director, for example, and you might say, gosh, there's something going on with Elizabeth. I'm going to ask Elizabeth's counselor what's going on in our next clinical staff meeting, and I'm going to bring this report in to remind me. Another feature of the Insight software is we allow clinicians to dig in and see how patients answered specific questions. So let's say you have a question about one of your patients whose PHQ-9 score just skyrocketed. You could click through and see exactly which of the elements of the PHQ-9 she answered as having a problem with. So she's saying that nearly every day she's feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. She's feeling tired, having little energy, etc. We also alert clinicians to new submissions by email or text. And we allow our users to request new surveys from the patients at the click of a button or automatically once a week. How we do this, if you click through to the survey link page, you can click on the name of a patient. And if you're in residential treatment and your patients don't have access to the internet, what you would do is you would do this on an iPad. You'd click on their name. You'll be automatically logged out of the software. You hand the iPad to the patient, and then they fill in the survey. But if you're dealing with outpatient clients who do have access to email or text, all you have to do is click Make a Request, and we will email or text a request to that patient asking them to take their next survey. And we do have a question here that I will answer. I just saw it as I went through. I was asked, what are the other standardized instruments we're using? So we use the PHQ-9 for depression. We use GAD-7 for anxiety. We use PCL-6 for trauma. We use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale for suicidal thoughts. We use Dr. Eric Stice EDDS, eating disorder survey questions. And then the other questions are things like satisfaction with treatment and how often are you attending treatment. And we created our own strength and frequency of cravings scales. And everything we do is HIPAA compliant. We are fully comply and protect your data. And of course, we sign a BAA. We're getting lots of questions. This is great. Are clinicians notified of red flags right away? Yes, they are. If you set it up that way, you have the option, and what we recommend is that clinicians immediately be notified of all critical alerts. Those are people expressing a high level of suicidal thoughts or that they're using drug or alcohol during treatment. And then you can set the time that you want to be alerted to the rest for each of the other types of reports, to whatever makes sense for you. So back to where we were. We also offer unlimited training sessions for clinicians and staff, and we offer free telephone and email support. So that's our basic insight program. That's access to the software. That provides, all of the information you need to monitor your patients. But if you are a Joint Commission accredited organization, you really want our pro version, because what we've done is we've added in all the reporting that the Joint Commission is going to want to see. So in order to prove that you're using Insight effectively, we provide quarterly audits. What that means is, we audit what percentage of your patients, have been enrolled in the research and are being monitored. How frequently are you receiving update reports on the different patients? And then how often is each clinician logging into the system to access the patient reports? So this is what you'd show to the Joint Commission, this couple-page audit, to show them that you are using this data to inform clinical care. And then we also do a comprehensive annual report where we look at patient information, a lot of demographic information, treatment history, what primary drugs of choice your patients are dealing with, etc. So this is the type of information you'd receive about your patients in terms of what percentage of them had been in previous substance use disorder treatment. We also look at the incidence at admission and the improvement during treatment of co-occurring disorders. So what you can see here is that at admission, 88% of the patients at this center were reporting moderate to severe levels of depression symptoms. By the time they had left treatment, that was down to 17%. So we made a substantial improvement in the levels of depression. We also will look at what percentage are successfully completing treatment. And so this will come sometimes from your census, sometimes hopefully as we integrate more thoroughly with different EHRs, it will come from your EHR record. So you'll be able to see what percentage of your patients are successfully completing treatment versus have left AMA or left for other reasons. And then we can compare your completion rate to national norms. So in this case, this a treatment center had 66% of their patients successfully completing treatment, and this compared quite positively to the 61.8% of patients in long-term residential treatment that were reported in the TEDS discharge survey, which is that were reported in the TEDS discharge survey, which is a national survey in 2014. We also look at satisfaction with treatment. What percentage of your patients reported being satisfied while they were in treatment? And by the way, this is a place that we have open-ended questions too, so we will show you exactly what your patient said. You know, after why, how satisfied are you with treatment, we'll ask why. And some patients will take the time to give us information, or others will just skip on by. But any comments that your patients tell us, we'll immediately report on their sample report. Okay, so because the Joint Commission is requiring this, as you might expect, we have a lot of clients who are interested in starting to use Insight Addiction before the 1st of January. And one of the issues we've heard is that they don't really want to wait a year to receive their first annual report. They'd really like to find out if there is another a problem. Maybe they're not doing as well with helping their patients dealing with PTSD symptoms, for example. They wanted to find this out earlier rather than later. So we've decided to hold an outcomes summit in late January. And this is by invitation only to our clients. There will be some sort of modest cost to this, but it's designed to help our clients ensure that their outcomes are on track. And each attendee will receive a preliminary report of their program's results to date. So you can see how are you doing in the first couple of months. And then most of the session, which actually is going to be probably a day and a half session, will be attendee-led group discussions. We're not the experts in, how do you reduce your level of AMAs, or, how do you help somebody who's, dealing with a particular psychological disorder, but you are. And so we're hoping that by getting folks into small group discussions to talk about the issues that they're really, challenged by, that you can learn a lot from each other about how to improve your outcomes. Hopefully one of our clients will be there with very low levels of people leaving against medical advice, and they'll be able to talk about what they're doing, and other people can learn from it. So I think this is going to be very useful for our clients. The one requirement we're making is that we want our clients to have at least 2 months of results so that they have useful information when they're coming to the outcome. So probably you're wondering, okay, how much does this cost? And I will say we want everyone to be able to be using this, and so we've made the pricing such that I think every size of treatment center can afford. So the pricing is a little bit different by size. Most treatment centers probably have 21 to 100 patients. Let's say that you are a 50-bed residential treatment center. The cost for Insight Pro, the version with all the reporting, is $12 per patient per month. So your cost would be $600 per month. And what you would receive is all the online patient screening and monitoring, the real-time graphing, clinician alerts, email or text requests to patients, phone and email support. We don't log people into long-term contracts. We're not losing our clients. And then you'd also receive the quarterly audit reports, a comprehensive annual report, and an invitation to the Outcome Summit. So again, for a mid-sized treatment center, that's $12 per patient per month. The price goes down for treatment centers serving over 100 patients at a time, and for the smallest treatment centers out there serving up to 20 patients, The pro pricing is $249 per month, regardless of the number of patients. Okay, so let's talk now about how do you thrive in the coming pay-for-value world. And I think this is coming a lot faster than many people think, many people are aware of. I was surprised to learn that about 20% of insured Americans were already attributed to an accountable care organization or a managed care organization by the middle of last year. And what these ACOs or MCOs typically do is they commit to paying, to achieving full care for patients for a certain dollar per patient on average. So if they're able to provide adequate care to their patients for less than that, then they get to keep some of that savings, often half or more. And if they go over that price, then they oftentimes have to pay some of the overage. So it's very important to them to keep their costs down, combined with the fact that research shows that it costs 4 times more to treat patients for physical health issues if they're struggling with addiction and co-occurring disorders. It becomes very clear that these programs really want to identify and partner with good addiction treatment centers. But the problem is very few treatment centers have the data that they want to see. You know, typically they'll want to see a year's worth of post-treatment data. And you know, a lot of addiction treatment centers don't do that type of research. So I was at an Open Minds conference that Dr. Christopher Smith spoke at recently, where he said, you know, we have lots of programs that come to us and say, hey, we'd like to be one of your partners. We'll share the financial risks. But he said, look, if they don't have data, it's not worth my time to meet with them. So it's really important in the world that's coming, the pay-for-value world, that you develop this kind of post-treatment data. So the two options for doing that are, obviously you can, you know, ask your staff or hire additional staff to do that, or you can hire an independent company to do it. And there are a couple of advantages to hiring an independent company. And one is, I'm kind of sad to bring it up, but we all know that there's a number of charlatans in this industry. I've been told by some treatment centers that they have 98% success rate, for example. And you want to say, you know, in what alternate universe are you living in? So if you have a research company do this for you, it takes away that question of, you know, is somebody going to believe the data you generated yourself? And the second reason for having an independent company do it is that they are more likely to make the 7 to 10 contacts that we've found are usually needed to get at least 60% of the patients responding. So what we do with Recovery 2020 is we use the same intake questionnaire as with Insight. So the two pieces of research are intertwined. And then we follow up with the patients 1 month, 6 months, and 12 months after leaving treatment. And we're looking to learn, you know, have they been able to abstain from all drugs and alcohol? Or if not, if they relapsed at 6 months, have they had the strength in the toolkit to get back on the wagon? We know what co-occurring disorders they were wrestling with. How are they doing now? And then what impact has treatment had on their quality of life? You know, were they bouncing sofa to sofa before and now they have their own apartment? Are they back working or in school? How are they getting along with their family? Have they been able to avoid any future run-ins with the criminal justice system? That sort of thing. So one thing that's different about Recovery 2020 than Insight is that with Insight, we promise that everything your patients tell us, we immediately report back to you. But for Recovery 2020, we promise your patients confidentiality. And the reason for that is if somebody knows that their counselor would be just really devastated to hear that they were back shooting heroin, you know, they might not be honest with us. So we promise your patients that everything they tell us will be kept confidential and only reported in aggregated form. The only exception to this is at the end of a survey, if somebody admits to using, we'll ask them, would you like someone from your treatment center to contact you to possibly discuss going back into treatment? And if they answer yes to that, then we will immediately let you know. So because we're the keepers of this data, it's really important that we provide it back in very useful ways. So we do two different reports. The first is a treatment effectiveness report, which is designed to be a marketing report to show payers and prospective future clients what impact your treatment has had on patients. So you will have hard data on abstinence rates. And by the way, what we consider the most important measure is what percentage of your patients were abstinent in the last 30 days at 1 year post-treatment. This is a chronic disease, relapse is common, but if they were able to get back on the wagon, then we consider that success. But as I said, we know a lot more about your patients now. And so we can show that, for example, among your, let's say, 88% of patients coming in struggling with depression, their average score at intake was a 22.3. By the time they left treatment, that had dropped by more than half. And it was able to stay down at that low levels up to a year post-treatment. So you could show payers that not only are you helping them with their addiction, but you're also helping them with their emotional health. We'll look at pre to post treatment, things like, what percentage are working or back in school. And we'll also look at a couple of things that are important to the insurers. One of the things they really care about is how many expensive medical interventions are your patients having. And if you can show them that it's substantially reduced in the 1 year post-treatment to the year before they came to treatment, then that's a major plus for them. And we look at this another way by estimating the relative cost of caring for a patient in the year before treatment to the year post-treatment by looking at half a dozen factors that they consider important to figuring out how expensive it's going to be to treat a patient. But we know a lot more about your patients too, and we really dig deep into your data looking for areas for improvement and what you're doing well. And then we summarize this in a second strategic analysis report. So perhaps we'd be able to look at your results by different programs. And we can see in this case that the women's program is doing a little bit better than the men's program. Well, we can dive into the numbers and try and figure out why. Maybe we'll discover that 3 of your male counselors have similar results, but the 4th one, maybe he's doing particularly well, or maybe he's doing particularly not well. And here's the type of comments we've heard about that counselor. We also maybe we'll see, well, you're doing well with a wide variety of different types of patients, but one exception is those that are dealing with a high level of PTSD symptoms. And in that case, maybe you want to beef up a trauma-informed care program. So what we're doing is we're digging into all of this to try and find what's different in your center and how can we help you identify what you're doing well and areas to improve, because our mission is to help the whole treatment industry improve. So Recovery 2020 is more expensive, as you'd expect, than Insight. The cost is $100 per patient for the post-treatment year. That's for all 3 follow-ups combined, so it's $33 per follow-up. And for larger treatment programs, we cap this at $25,000 per year per program. So maybe, if you have 1,000 patients coming through and you want a full report on those that are in one treatment center and then another report on those in another treatment center, it would be $25,000 per year times 2. And the only additional cost to Recovery 2020 is that we incentivize our researchers to go the extra mile. And, we can't get you good data if we can't reach a high percentage of your patients. So if we're able to contact at least 60% of the patients in any given month, we'll charge a bonus of between 10% and 20% on that month's calls. And that really goes to our researchers to incentivize them to make that 10th call and get through. And just so you know, we are consistently above 60% follow-up rate on our 1-month, 6-month, and 12-month surveys. It varies a little bit over time, but over the last year, we have typically been above 60% for all the surveys. Right now, we're going through a rough time for our 6-month survey, and it's dipped a little bit, but we're figuring out ways to bring that back up. So we work really, really hard to be able to reach your clients. So we think this type of research just has the potential to just revolutionize the addiction treatment world, and we are anxious to find more partners to work with. If you love what you've heard and you're ready to start now, please go to start-outcomes.com. It'll take you 1 minute to sign up. I understand most of you will have to go talk to other people on your staff. That's fine. My only recommendation is please don't wait until right before you need this. It's clear we're going to have to institute a 4th quarter wait list because we want to make sure that we spend the time to get all of our new clients onboarded effectively. If you just want more information at this point, you can download an ebook we have at outcomes.ebook.com. This is called Using Personalized Evidence-Based Treatment to Improve Outcomes and Your Bottom Line. And that's what I have. So I'm ready to open it up for questions. I think we've gotten a lot coming through. If you have some questions that don't get answered today, please call our sales team at 833-4-OUTCOMES or visit our website. So I thank you very much. Come to our website if you want the ebook, or go to start-outcomes.com if you'd like to sign up. So let's see. I know that there have been a lot of questions that have come up. If you have any other questions, type them in now. I am going to kind of scroll through this. We got asked, do we ask about employment? Yes, we do. How and where are our data stored? We have our own secure server with full HIPAA protections, and everyone we work with complies fully with HIPAA and does a BAA agreement. Speaking of BAA agreements, let me just tell you how easy it is to get started. If you go to start-outcomes.com, we'll ask just some general information about you and the size of your treatment program, and then there's only 3 things we need to do to get started. The first is we need to fill in a BAA agreement where we agree to keep your data secure and protected. You can do that online. Then we need to know the names, titles, and email addresses of your clinicians and staff that need access to the software. And then we just go ahead and schedule a first training session, and we can usually get people started within a day or 2. Our email's free from any types of information that would indicate they are in treatment. Yes, we send a link. We say something to the effect of, "Hi, David, can you fill out this survey for Patty today?" ? And then a link to the survey. What other questions have we asked? Alex asked, how do we normalize completion data across the length of care? We use your definition of completion. So if you're a 28-day program, it's when you tell us that the patient has completed that we can start, we mark them as completed in Insight, And that's when we start Recovery 2020, from the date they leave your treatment program. And then we will do our best to compare similar programs in the norms that we are developing. We are in the early days, as I mentioned, of integrating with different EHRs. We have agreed to move forward and have started the integration process with Kipu. What we're working on first is getting the ability to bring client data into Insight from Kipu. And then the next phase will be where when new data comes into Insight, the PDF is automatically uploaded into Kipu, into the patient record. I don't know how long it's going to take to get that done. It's kind of up to Kipu. And if we have several clients asking for it, I think it'll happen faster. So those are the two main things that we're integrating with Kipu. And as I said, we're talking with several other EHRs about possibly integrating. If you sign up with us and you're interested in having integration done with an EHR that I haven't mentioned, then we will work with you to approach that EHR and ask to integrate. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. And I want to thank again the American Addiction Treatment Association for inviting us. So thank you again for your interest, and thanks so much for the incredibly important work that you all do. This concludes the webinar.